and then we just need to sort of add on from there to when we return.
Yeah. And then after the tea break, we'll come back in here and we'll have our online study group discussing the material. Okay, so we're going to whiz over to the shrine room and we'll see you in a little while for our group.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shiva viewer to come over from the other shrine room. Good, so we'll make a start. Just welcome again to those of you who are online. I think you've already been welcomed very well by Pranyakato and Shubhavyu. Good to have you with us here. So, just as I said last night, in the later 1970s, 1976 actually, Bhante led this seminar on the Door of Liberation, which is this anthology of Tibetan texts translated under the supervision of Geshe Wangyal by some of his disciples. And it was just recently published then. Got an original edition here. You can see it looks very 70s, doesn't it? And there's a very nice picture of a smiling Geshe Wangyal on the back. So, yeah, there were a lot fewer books on Buddhism, Buddhist scriptures about at that point. And you go in a bookshop and there'd just be sort of half a shelf. I mean, nowadays there's books coming out on Buddhism every week, just about. There's dozens and dozens. It's hard to know what to read, but then anything new was very welcome, and especially a really well supervised and done scholarly translation of but also very accessible translation of a traditional text. So, yeah, Bhante took advantage of this new translation and led a seminar on it with a group of order members, as I said last night, a very young order then, young both in terms of the people and the order itself was what, 8 years old, something like that at that point. So we're going to be looking at these teachings from Atisha and his disciples and Bhante's commentary on them over this retreat. And I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about Atisha, just to set the scene. I do find her a very attractive character. Of all the teachers of the past on the refuge tree, I think he's probably the one I feel the most resonance with. And as I mentioned, that picture on the shrine, you do get a bit of a sense of the man himself. It's a bit closer to a portrait than some of the more stylized pictures you often get. So his ordination name was Dipankara Srinyana, but he's best known in Tibet as Atisha, which means outstanding, eminent, great lord. And he was born in a noble family in Bengal in 982 of the Common Era. So this is already 15 1500 years after the Buddha. So by this time, it was quite a mixed picture for Buddhism. In India, by this time, Buddhism was mostly confined to the northeast, and a renewed Hinduism was resurgent, having absorbed many aspects of Buddhism into itself. So it was on a popular level. It's very difficult for people to tell the difference between them. But Buddhism had by then spread into Southeast Asia and through Central Asia to China, Japan. It was very widespread outside of India. And in India, it was Tantric Buddhism that was predominant. And again, a very mixed picture. There were some very great masters, but there were also some pretty wild and woolly and unruly characters. And it wasn't always easy to tell at first sight which were the great masters and which were the wild men. Again, it was quite a mixed picture by all accounts. So Atisha was drawn to the Dharma. He's probably had his first initiation from his father, who was a Buddhist and a Tantric initiate. And he went on to receive many teachings and initiations. There's traditional stories that I came across, probably legendary, but still quite fun. There's one story where his parents wanted him to marry. It's time, son, to settle down, take some responsibilities. But he asked if, first of all, he could go on a hunting trip. Okay, let the lad have his last fling, let him enjoy himself. But actually, what he did was go off and study with some tantric teachers. And then when he came back, he had with him 8 naked yogis and yoginis. And his parents thought, the boy's gone bonkers, the boy's gone mad. He's not up to it. We don't want him taking authority, taking responsibility. So they let him go off and become a monk. So, age 29, he became a monk. He was ordained at Bodh Gaya and studied and in time taught at the great Buddhist universities of Nalanda and Vikramashila. But he still felt something was lacking. He'd entered into the Dharma, into practice deeply, but something was missing. And he heard of a great Mahayana teacher called Dharma Kirti, or Selingpa, in Sumatra, the Golden Isle, one of the Indonesian islands, were then a great center of Buddhism. You've probably all seen pictures of the great Mandala Stupa of Borobudur in Java. So, a very great center of Buddhism at that time in Indonesia. Our Rupa here is in the style of Borobudur, so we've got a connection with that. So Atisha embarked on this dangerous sea journey. It actually took 13 months then. Ships weren't that very well built, and I guess he must have just gone along the coast. It was a dangerous journey, but he got there with a band of disciples. He found Dharmakirti and asked for teaching. And Dharmakirti asked him in response, did he think he could develop love and compassion? And was he prepared to stay and train with him for 12 years? So he replied yes to both questions, and he stayed and trained with Dharmakirti in Saddhalokha in Indonesia for 12 years in Sumatra. So he was training very much in the Mahayana tradition that had come through teachers like Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Shantideva. So this is between 32 and 44 that Atisha was studying in Sumatra with with Saddhalokha. He then went back to India and was especially associated with the Buddhist University of Vikramashila. And he engaged in debate, as was the custom in those days. During this time, a war broke out between the Hindu king of Western India and the Buddhist ruler of Magadha. And the Hindu king was eventually defeated. And it's interesting that Atisha acted as a peacemaker. He took him under his protection and helped negotiate a peace. So he's obviously by this time a well-known and respected, much looked to figure. And his fame had also spread to Tibet. So he was invited at this point by the king of West Tibet to go there and help with the revival of Buddhism. So there was quite a revival of Buddhism going on in Tibet in the 10th, 11th centuries. Buddhism had first reached Tibet in the 7th and 8th centuries, along with Indian culture. With Buddhism and Indian culture being a great civilizing influence. And that first wave of Buddhism is particularly associated with Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava, the building of Samye Monastery. And in the 9th century, the king called a great Buddhist council and arranged for the translation of Buddhist texts. But then he was assassinated, and there was a whole period of turmoil, turbulence, lawlessness. By the 11th century, things have become more stable and Buddhism begins to revive. And this is the time when Marpa, all heard of as Milarepa's teacher, went to India and met Naropa. The time of Milarepa, he was born in 1052. So a bit after Atisha. And then Milarepa's disciple Gampopa founded the Kagyapa school. We're also the time when Drogmi, who'd studied with Naropa, again at Marpa at Vikramashila, he went to southern Tibet, and his disciples founded the Shakyapa school. So the beginning of some of the major schools of Tibetan Buddhism at this time. So the king of Western Tibet sent a delegation to Vikramashila to meet Atisha. And they met with him apparently secretly, and quite a lot of time sort of negotiating, trying to persuade him to go to Tibet. And it took him a while to make his decision. And in the meantime, the king of Western Tibet had been captured by bandits and held to ransom. So they wanted his weight in gold as ransom. And his nephew was collecting the ransom, but it was still not enough. Apparently, the weight of his head was still missing. So, and in the end, the old king sent a message: "Look, I'm old. I'm not got long to live. Let me die. Much better use that gold you've been collecting to bring Atisha to Tibet." And Atisha was very moved by this story. He consulted Tara. He'd been devoted to Tara since his childhood, and apparently earlier in his life, before going to Sumatra, he'd heard statues at Bodh Gaya whispering together about the true path. And I gather there's a statue of Tara at Bodh Gaya that's still worshipped as having given Atisha guidance. I didn't come across it, I wasn't pointed to it myself when I was at Bodh Gaya, but next time I'm there, I'll certainly see if I can find it, if I get there again. So Tara now, I don't know quite how this conversation took place, but Tara told Atisha that if he went to Tibet, he'd bring many beings to the Dharma, but he'd shorten his own life by 20 years. So he decided to go. He took 2 years to get to Tibet. People travelled slowly in those days. The first part of the journey on elephant, and the second on horseback, spending some time in Nepal on the way and teaching and so on. So he reached Tibet in 1042. So he was already 60 when he went to Tibet. So, 60, quite a tough journey, quite a wild and unruly place still in many ways. So he met the scholar and translator Rinchen Sangpo, who'd founded many monasteries and who was himself now 85 years old. And at first, Rinchen Sangpo treated Atisha's arrival with reserve. He was a bit suspicious of this newcomer coming in, but he actually very soon came to have great respect for Atisha once they'd spoken together and got to know each other. So Atisha had come to view the monastic life as the centerpiece of Buddhist spirituality, and he understood this as taking monastic ordination and living a simple, unpretentious life. So the Tibetans whom Atisha accepted as his disciples, he required them to follow 4 rules: to abstain from marriage, intoxicants, travel, and possessions of money. So he really encouraged a life of religious poverty and great simplicity. So his chief disciple, Drom, who founded the Kadampa tradition, he actually never became a monk, but he lived, if you like, this very simple life, but not bound by all the rules, just by these very simple rules. So Atisha told his disciples to keep a low seat. Just not being proud, not trying to be high and important. He encouraged them to wear simple clothing rather than fancy embroidered vestments and so on, not letting their mind become preoccupied with food, clothing, fame, importance. So the Vajrayana was then very popular, and there was this stress on receiving many initiations. But Atisha explained, if you practiced one sadhana really deeply, then you actually practiced all sadhanas. So a bit of a familiar message. And Atisha emphasized the Mahayana ideal and saw the Vajrayana as supporting the Mahayana rather than superseding it. So his approach was what we would now call ecumenical, drawing on whatever he saw as most truly helpful in the whole tradition. So he wrote a book, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, and just laying out in a very careful, systematic way the path of practice and regular steps, which was something of a model for Tsongkhapa when he wrote his Lamrim text. Atisha always placed great emphasis on going for refuge. So he was known sometimes as the Refuge Lama. He also placed great emphasis on ethics and the precepts. So he was sometimes known as the Karma Lama. And apparently when he heard about these nicknames, he was very pleased. He was very glad to be recognized for those emphases. Wherever he went, he stressed the importance of acting from metta, from kindness and love. And at the heart of everything, he saw the bodhicitta, the coming together of emptiness and compassion, shunyata karuna garbha. Whenever he met his disciples, he'd ask them, is bodhicitta always blending with all your thoughts? Is it there in all your actions? This is the way he sort of met his disciples with this question. So the teachings that we find in the Kadampa precepts are coming from Atisha and his immediate disciples that we're going to be looking at. I find they have a warmth, directness, a really lovely quality to them, very down to earth, and at the same time a real depth and profundity, and the same sort of uncompromising clarity we meet in the Buddha of the Pali Canon and Shantideva in many of the great teachers. And weaving in there too, there's a gentle humour. There's a story of how Atisha took with him to Tibet when he first went, a Bengali cook who was notorious for his bad temper and grumpiness and so on. And people just wondered why on earth he had this man with him. But later on, the cook disappeared and they asked why he didn't have him any longer. And he said, well, having this cook meant he had someone there to always be testing his patience, encouraging him to develop Kshanti. But he realised with the Tibetans around, he didn't need the cook. I don't know if any of you have heard of the story of Gurdjieff, the early 20th century, I think, spiritual teacher, I think came out of the theosophical tradition. He lived with some disciples in a chateau in France, and he had living there, well, amongst the disciples there was this really bad-tempered, argumentative, difficult man. And one day he just stormed off, this difficult man. Everybody was really relieved and pleased that Gurdjieff went hurrying off after him and persuaded him to come back. And it later turned out that Gurdjieff was actually paying him to be there just to sort of keep his disciples on their toes, test their mettle. So, we can see a little bit of that in Atisha and that story of his Bengali cook. So initially, he only planned to spend 3 years in Tibet. But when he tried to get back to India, his journey was interrupted by war. There was a war going on, I think, in Nepal. And he ended up actually spending the rest of his life in Tibet. So just 12 years, but he had a tremendous and enduring effect. So before he died in 1054, Atisha appointed Drom as his successor, and he lived for another 9 years after Atisha. As I said earlier, he's never a monk, but he had great energy, great devotion, and he founded a monastery at Reting and the Kadampa school that had a profound influence on all the other schools of Tibetan Buddhism. In time, the Kadampa school was absorbed into the Gelugpa school, founded by Tsongkhapa, but that was quite a bit later on. But yes, the influence of Atisha runs on through all the schools of Tibet, and yes, again mentioned yesterday, very much in the mind training teachings and the Tonglen Bodhicitta practice. It's very popular in all those schools. So maybe that's enough just to give you some flavour of Atisha. And I really hope we're going to be enjoying, benefiting, getting to know him and his immediate disciples more immediately over these days. For those of you who are interested, and he did give a talk on Atisha in Sheffield back in the 90s, and you can look that up on Free Buddhist Audio if you'd like to. So that's Atisha. We'll just take a breather for a couple of minutes, and then I'll just give a short introduction to our first precept. Are there any questions before I go on?
When did that hold the seminar?
1976.
Has that been transcribed?
Yeah. So if you're interested in the seminar, I made a note actually in my notes. I was going to say later, but I'll say now. If you're interested in the seminar, go to Free Buddhist Audio. At the top of the page, click on texts. A little box comes up with seminars. You click on Show All, and then they're in alphabetical order. You come to the Door of Liberation, and there's two Door of Liberations. One says Contents, and if you go through the contents, you find chapter 3 on the Kadampa precepts, because if you just try and scroll through, it can take quite a long time to find. But if you go to contents, you find the page number for the Kadampa precepts.
The PDF's about 400 pages.
Yeah, I think it starts, the Kadampa precepts about page 172. You can, do encourage you to do your own reading in there. As I said, I started to included some seminar extracts that stood out for me, but there may be other things that stand out for you. But it is one of those seminars that really does have a lot of very strong Dharma in it. In some seminars, the sort of issues of the day are being talked about quite a bit, and they're not quite so engaging sort of 40, 50 years on, but here in this seminar, it's just very, very rich Dharma, really explored very fully. So yeah, it's a seminar well worth going back to. Okay, so this is the first of the precepts collected from here and there. So this compilation of the teachings of Atisha and his leading disciples. So this is the one we're going to be looking at today. I'll read the precept. It's quite a short one, but Bhante managed to find a lot to say about it, and I think there is a lot to explore in it. When Atisha arrived in Tibet, his 3 disciples, Ku, Nok, and Drom, asked him, for attaining the high state of liberation and omniscience, which is more important, to follow the precept of the Lama or to follow the scriptures and commentaries? Atisha replied, the precept of the Lama is more important than scriptures and commentaries. Why is that? They asked. Even if you know that the primary characteristics of all phenomena is voidness, and can recite the Tripitaka as well, you and the teaching will be completely separate if you do not apply the precept of the Lama at the time of practice. Again, the disciples asked, please define the practice of the precept of the Lama. Is it simply striving to do virtuous deeds in body, speech and mind, and acting in accordance with the 3 vows, the vow of individual liberation, the Bodhisattva vow, and the Tantric vow? Both of those are insufficient, Atisha answered. But why? Although you keep the 3 vows, if you do not renounce the 3 realms of samsara, your activities will only increase your worldliness. Although you strive to perform virtuous deeds in body, speech and mind, both day and night, if you do not dedicate this work to the enlightenment of all, you will end up with numerous wrong concepts. Though you meditate and are considered a holy and wise teacher, if you do not abandon your interest in the 8 worldly concerns, whatever you do will only be for the purposes of this life, and in the future you will not find the right path. So, strong, uncompromising teaching from Atisha there. Just a practical point. Lama simply means teacher, so the importance of the teacher, the spiritual teacher. There's a lot in that, but in terms of what was drawn out in the discussion that certainly like us to look at as well, is the way the precepts of today become the scriptures of tomorrow. And I think just understanding this can give a real freshness to the way we approach the Buddhist scriptures. So this is something that Bhante really brought out in the seminar. So yes, the Buddha wandered. He taught for 45 years, often speaking very directly to a particular person or group of people in a specific context. And what we had there was a very immediate, alive response to those people, that situation, directly from the heart-mind of enlightenment. And these exchanges were remembered and passed on down over the centuries before, after some maybe nearly 500 years, being written down. And in the process of being passed on, they were often formalized. There was the use of stock phrases and repetitions, just to help the process of passing on. We just need to engage our imagination to get back to that original immediacy and freshness. This sense of specific people, specific person. There may be more general truths and principles relevant for most that can be drawn out over time and become part of wider Buddhist doctrine. But this sense of how these precepts of the day become the scriptures of tomorrow. It's something very, very striking, I think, and just really recognizing that. We can also see the Buddha experimenting, looking for the most effective way to get through to people, trying to discover ways that worked. And those that worked, he would come back to again and again. So on his final tour in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, we find him again and again, teaching the threefold way: ethics, meditation, wisdom. Clearly he found this was a teaching that he could rely on, and that he wanted people to really take to heart. And yet then another time we see the Buddha trying to give the concept of the Brahmin a new meaning, but beginning to find it was just too entrenched. The attitudes and assumptions were too entrenched, and in his later teaching, he just dropped that. So we find Atisha now teaching, it's already something like 1500 years after the Buddha. So by then we have this very rich, very diverse tradition, and we see him choosing particular emphases and approaches. And then another 1,000 years on, Bhante, with his early disciples in this seminar, the tradition even richer, even more diverse, and with more and more of that richness and diversity becoming helpful, becoming available, having to ask what's most helpful. And now us, 46 years on from that seminar, in a fast changing world, what's important to us now, what's going to be helpful, as we explore these teachings in terms of our own Dharma life and the Dharma life of those that we're meeting and trying to pass the Dharma on to. So this emphasis on the importance of the teacher, the Lama, it's interesting that this was something that Atisha's disciples, obviously very sincere, dedicated practitioners, this is something they really wanted to ask him about. And this is the precept the compiler starts with. Again, it says something that when these precepts were gathered together, this was the one that the compiler, after another 100 years or so, this was the one that the compiler began with. So this importance of a connection with someone further on the path than oneself, more deeply in touch with the spirit of the Dharma. Just a sort of personal anecdote. When I was in the late 70s, I was living in Ireland in a community with people with learning difficulties and just starting to feel I wanted to be around other Buddhists. It was actually run by followers of Rudolf Steiner, a sort of theosophical, mystical Christian teaching, which I really respected their work, but I couldn't get on with their philosophy, and realised more and more I wanted to be around Buddhists. So I wrote around to different Buddhist groups, and the only one I got a sort of encouraging reply from was the then FWBO. And I got a newsletter and read about Sangharakshita, who had been to India where I'd been and had long hair and spoke English, unlike some of the Tibetan and Indian teachers I'd been meeting, and thought, well, maybe he's someone who'll understand me and tell me what I need to do. So I wrote a long rambling letter one day before going to milk the cows, which I did by hand in this farm in Ireland, and got a reply. And he said in the reply, he wouldn't try and answer all my questions because he'd have to write 3 or 4 books to do that. But he would give me some advice since I'd asked for some. And the advice was just very striking. It was just the importance of being around other people who share your values, and how without that it's very easy for those ideals and values to get lost or come to nothing. And just also the importance of people a bit further on the path than yourself, who can offer you help and guidance. And that struck a strong note for me. I'd had these sort of spiritual ideals for over 10 years, and in some ways I felt a bit more grumpy and bad-tempered and further away from those ideals than I had when I started. And just that advice of the importance of being around others who shared one's ideals, and especially those a bit further on the path than oneself, it really struck home to me. So, following that advice, I made connection, and here I am today. So, the way I sort of put it, what Atisha says here is good intentions aren't enough. We can follow the precepts, we can study, we can have a good understanding of shunyata, we can meditate regularly, but we can miss the point. We can somehow miss the point. We can something of self-clinging, of some misunderstanding is embedded in our being. Certainly my own unfolding experience, and I suspect, we've all been practicing a good few years now. As certain aspects of the Dharma become clearer, we can end up sort of thinking, how can I have had such a simplistic understanding of the Dharma? How can I, just one begins to sense just how profound and mysterious and wonderful it is. How can I have seen it as being so simple, but I did. And it's not just a matter of words. One might have all the right words, but somehow one's missing the point. And I think that's probably true for us all as we go deeper into the Dharma. We think we've understood. A bit later on we think, oh, now I really understand. I didn't before. And a bit later on, now I understand. And how easy it might be for us to sort of level out if we don't have others around who are a bit further ahead, who are able to mirror back to us where we're really at and give us a sense that there is further to go, that there is more to do. Wake us up, if you like, to the limitations of our current understanding. And this connects to another point that could speak of as the mystery of human communication. There was a title of a talk once, wasn't it, Bhante gave. So we learn from and we're shaped so much by those around us, for good and for bad. Just over Christmas, I was watching my grandchildren, my 1.5-year-old granddaughter, copying her 5-year-old brother. She was learning how to be a human being, but just copying. And it's just very striking, that's what she was doing. She was just copying someone, because that's what you do. And sometimes, you see a small boy, 5 or 6 or whatever, walking along next to his dad, and just the way he walks and everything, it's just like he's learning to be a man, if you like, learning to be by just mirroring what he sees out there. And those around us, either sometimes consciously, sometimes not so consciously, we decide we want to be like them, or we definitely don't want to be like them. But we're using others as a mirror of how to be, how to live. So yes, this value of a teacher, a spiritual friend who we trust, whose vision, experience, understanding we trust, and who we're open to, so that actually that mysterious influence of the Dharma can actually come to us through them. And yes, just through being around them, get a glimpse of our current limitations and where we need to go, want to go. And again, for me, this ties in with this Buddhist, with their understanding that for Buddhism, wisdom isn't something that we get hold of, but not something we get hold of and add on to ourselves, but rather something that we become. And again, it connects with the insistence that we meet again and again in Atisha and his disciples, that wisdom and compassion can't be separated. What we know can't be separated from what we are, how we live, how we behave. And wisdom and compassion are intimately interconnected. Ratnaguna, when we were preparing for this retreat, picked up on something that Bhante said in the seminar. He made a little bit of a play on words between precepts, or precept, and percept. So it's not so much that the teacher will tell one what to do, as it were, just give you a precept, more that they'll share a deeper, clearer perception of what's going on with us, or what's going on in life, what life is about, so that we can start to see for ourselves what our next step needs to be. So I think that's very interesting sort of shifted, just shift one letter, percept, precept, but that's what we're actually looking at from these precepts, a deeper perception of what we need to do next, how we can actually live a fuller, deeper life in the Dharma. So again, coming out of the seminar, this understanding that study isn't just about learning more about Buddhism. It's good to know our Buddhism, good to know our Dharma, to have a good broad understanding of the Dharma, of the tradition. But our study should always be supporting the work of transformation of our whole being at every level in the light of the Dharma. So yeah, Dharma study isn't something in any way abstract, but is rather about helping make the Dharma more immediately relevant to our life as we're living it, at whatever stage of the path we're on right now. And yes, this idea that the job of a good study leader is to help facilitate this. So yeah, not in the way of handing down precepts, what you need to do and what you need to do, mitra number 1, and what you need to do, mitra number 2 is not in that way, but much more in the way of really encouraging study as this mutual entering more deeply into the Dharma in a way that allows it to really speak to us, and so that we actually leave good study with a sense of precepts, with perceptions of what we need to do next. Yeah, and really hope that we can enter into study in this way over this retreat, because it really does seem, this is the spirit of study we want to sort of keep alive, bring alive, encourage in our order as a really valuable and integral part of the practice and our overall practice, and weaving together with meditation, puja, and so on. It's just strengthening and unfolding life in the Dharma. So that's just a few thoughts to set us on the way for looking at this first precept. How are we doing for time? Shall we have a break now for 15 minutes? We're actually going to be studying directly above here this morning. There's a muddle up with room booking, so if those of us who are in person will meet just after 1:15 upstairs here, just up those stairs in the room directly above the shrine room. And those online,
Let's say 20 minutes.
20 minutes for those online.
For those online, we'll be meeting together in 20 minutes. Okay? Great. Thank you all.